Welcome to one more edition of Politics Done Right. I'm Egberto Willis, your host. We have an excellent cast today, like you guys would not imagine. We have Arthur Canigues is president of Future Wave, Inc., a nonprofit organization dedicated to shifting our culture of violence to a culture of peace. He is the director producer of The World is My Country, about the amazing adventures of world citizen #1, Garry Davis. David Gallup specializes in human rights, world citizen, and world law education. He's the president and general counsel of the World Service Authorities, Washington, D.C., a global public service human rights organization founded in 1954. He is also a board member of Citizens for Global Solutions, CGS team leader of the Peace and Youth Outreach Program, and convener of the World Court of Human Rights Coalition. And of course, least but not least, but a very powerful woman, Melanie Bennett, is the producer of The World is My Country and the podcast People Powered Planet podcast. And anytime I hear People Powered, you guys know what I stand for. You are my hero. But anyhow, let's go ahead and get our folks to introduce themselves. Melanie, tell me a little bit about yourself.
Well, I've been excited to be a part of the solution of stopping war and having world peace for quite some time, and have enjoyed being part of the World is My Country project, and I'm very excited to be here. So thank you.
Excellent job. David, talk to me.
Yes, Egberto. Yeah, I'm delighted to be here. Thank you for having us today. My name is David Gallup. I'm a human rights lawyer. I'm the president and chief attorney of World Service Authority, which is the organization that Garry Davis founded in 1954. He's the fellow who is the main event, or the main focus in the film, The World is My Country, talking about how we can find solutions to deal with the global situation that we're in now, that we've been in forever, which leads us to war. So how do we how do we find law that could lead us to peace?
Love that. And last but not least is Arthur Canigues. I mean, my brother, we've spoken several times before. You know, I love you, man. Talk to me.
Love you so much, and your show, and your wonderful daughter, and just your terrific presentation to the world. Yes, I, as you mentioned, am the director of the film The World is My Country, and Garry Davis was a good friend of mine for a quarter of a century, and he was world citizen #1. And our film is introduced by Martin Sheen, who fell in love with Garry when he heard Garry's story and just said, you know, the world has to have this story. He calls it a roadmap to a better future. And, you know, Garry started off, he was a song and dance man on Broadway, Danny Kaye's understudy. And then he's ordered to bomb the city of Brandenburg. And he sees the footage, the people he's killed in their homes and schools and factories, and his own brother's killed, and his heart is broken. He says, well, you'll see, I'll play you a little clip. He says, why wasn't I arrested for bombing people and blowing them up in their homes anywhere in the world? Every country in the world, murder is illegal, and outside it, it's not illegal. We can just go blow up people anytime this is crazy. And this sent him on his mission. So at some point when you're ready, we could even start off with a little clip about
let's
him.
go ahead and play that clip right now.
All right.
Then I read Tom Paine's The Rights of Men. Tom Paine made that famous statement, my country is the world. So if the world is our country, this is too simple really, if the world is our country and we claim it, and we raise our allegiance to that level, to the top level, no more fictional borders. That's the key. And therefore, no more wars. Suddenly, it becomes very clear to me. I didn't get arrested for bombing cities because there's no law against it. The national politicians fool us by talking about international law. But treaties are just deals between sovereign nation states, which can be broken, and are, all through history.
There before his cabinet, President Coolidge signed for the United States a treaty designed to outlaw war.
Because there's no police force to enforce them. In other words, very simply, no world law. And that hit me like a ton of bricks. And that, folks, is why we fought World War II. A war between the nations, not between us, the peoples. If we had had world law, we could have eliminated the global lawlessness, the world anarchy that gave rise to Hitler and the Holocaust, and my brother would be alive today.
There never was a war in history easier to prevent by timely action than the one which has just desolated such great areas of the globe. It could have been prevented, in my belief, without the firing of a single shot.
Now, when Kansas and Colorado have a quarrel over the water in the Arkansas River, they don't call out the National Guard in each state and go to war over it. They bring a suit in the Supreme Court of the United States and abide by the decision. There isn't a reason in the world why we cannot do that internationally. It'll be just as easy for nations to get along in a republic of the world as it is for us to get along in the Republic of the United States.
When I finally realized that world law is essential for the very survival of humanity, I knew I had to take action. But what? I'm an actor. I never studied law. I never went to law school. What can I do? I think all of you are asking probably that big question.
Let me ask you something. First of all, tell me the gist, what you got out of that clip. Let me start with Melanie. Melanie, what did you get out of that clip?
Well, I think the power of law and the fact that if we have world law, then we can solve a lot of problems.
Now, it's interesting, Arthur, that when I watch him, right, when he talks about how can we have false boundaries, what does that really mean? What does that mean to you?
Well, inside the United States, we would never think of Pennsylvania and New York going to war to solve their problems, or any states. I mean, humanity has already invented a system that eliminates war. That doesn't mean there's no problems or crimes, but even when Tim McVeigh blew up the federal building, Michigan Oklahoma didn't declare war on Michigan for harboring the Michigan militia. It's handled as a criminal justice thing. You don't have to blow people up. I think in your own life, you had an experience where they were trying, maybe you want to share a minute, your own experience.
I mean, I'll just say quickly, because it's about you guys, not me, but back in Panama, Bush invaded in 1989 because they claimed they wanted to get Manuel Antonio Noriega, who was the dictator of Panama, but who worked for the CIA. And when he asked them to invade another country in Central America, he said, hell no. And Bush said, well, hell yes, we're going to blow you up if you don't do what we ask you to do. I mean, I'm paraphrasing, of course, but then they decided to fly into Panama, brought the brigades in, killed 10,000 Panamanians, claimed they only killed 1,000 Panamanians. They bombed the country without Air Force, Marine, Navy, or whatever. And it's not at all different than what's happening in Ukraine. Now, look, what's happening in Ukraine is horrendous. Russia is doing something that is horrendous, and we are doing the right thing by supporting Ukraine, in my humble opinion. I'd like to hear yours. In my humble opinion, we're doing right by supporting and trying to end this war there, but they are doing nothing that we ourselves haven't done. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, David.
Well, Garry once said to me, peace is not the absence of war, it's the presence of law. And we don't have a common world law. That means that if you shoot someone on the streets of Panama City, or you shoot someone on the streets of Washington, D.C., well, within those places, in those locales, it is murder. But outside of that nation state system, it is not. In fact, there are actual international humanitarian laws, that, like the Geneva Conventions, that say that killing can be legal as long as it's restricted to military combatants and military targets and not civilians, as long as it's quick and winnable. Well, most wars nowadays, and we've seen in the news, the most recent war here in Ukraine, that the majority of casualties are civilians. About 80%, if not more, are civilians. So this system that we're still working in, however you want to say, we want to support, of course, our fellow humans, but I want to say, to take this idea outside of the system that we're in and say, well, we don't want to support people as Ukrainians or people as Russians, although we do. We want to support them as human beings. So we really have to start thinking about a different mindset. and a mindset of law that we haven't had before. And within the nation state system, with the International Court of Justice or the UN Charter, it will, because if you look at Article 2 of the UN Charter, it actually embeds a principle that is the biggest problem, I think, and that is that nation states are sovereign, and you cannot pierce the veil of that sovereignty if there is violence or human rights violations going on within, or if one nation starts fighting another nation because they say it's for self-defense, then how do you stop that? And especially in the nuclear age, it's almost impossible to stop that. So until we remove those weapons, until we add law beyond this nation state system, we're going to keep getting into these wars one after the other.
But we know one of the countries that we would least want to be a part of the excluding the exception for not exception, but what the nation state is, or the sovereignty of a nation state, is the United States. I mean, we are not even part of the World Court. I mean, the Hague. Is that correct?
The International Criminal Court. Yeah.
Yes, the U.S. Is signed onto the International Court of Justice, which is, I mean, excuse me, the International Court, Court of Justice in The Hague, which is the body of the UN, and that body has already ruled that this war in Ukraine is illegal and ordered Russia to stop. And of course, Russia is actually legally compelled. It's illegally enforced. It's illegally, but it's legally bound. But there's no cops to enforce it, as Garry said. Even though, like Kellogg-Briand, it is a legal pact they're part of. But there's also another thing called the International Criminal Court, which makes the individuals who do this, like an individual, like
Right.
Putin or anyone who orders a war crime, that individual can be prosecuted. And that has been used effectively against some of the African dictators who've hit crazy wars. But when it comes to the powerful countries, they just refuse.
But we are not signatory to that. As maybe I got it wrong, but if I'm not mistaken, we are not signatory, nor is Russia to that, correct?
David, do you know that from the International Criminal Court?
The International Criminal Court, the U.S. has not ratified that Treaty of Rome, meaning that they're outside, and I don't think Russia has either. So that means that they can't, the leaders of those countries cannot be taken to task or prosecuted in that court. And of course, if they tried, well, that's certainly when perhaps nuclear weapons would start to be dropped, maybe even on The Hague.
Now I'm going to go off. I'm going to go a sideways topic just because I love the title of her podcast, People Powered Planet Podcast. So what can we do, Melanie, where we can start trying to get our leaders to be a bit less state sovereign and more world cooperative, if you will? After all, it's a people powered planet, right?
Right. And what I'd like to add to that, how to get people to change? Well, I would note we have a system scientist that's incredible, Riane Eisler. She wrote the book, The Chalice and the Blade, among many, many other books, and incredible work. And what she has found is that we're in a system, we're in a domination system, basically. There are societies today that are more partnerism. So there's a social scale. On one side, you have the domination societies where there's a hierarchy, there's in and out groups, there's force and fear.
Why don't you give us some example of what you call a dominating society and a more cooperative society?
Okay, for example, you have the United States, very hierarchical, very dominating, very violent, unfortunately. And then you have the Nordic states. There's Norway, for example, Sweden, where there's more, one thing you might notice, there's more women in government, where there's more equality of the genders, which is very helpful. And there's more caring. People have parental leave, whether they're male or female. It's very exciting. So they're more geared towards the partnerism system.
I want to expand on that, because you hit on something that I think is very important, and it applies here to the United States. The United States would tell you that those guys over there, they're socialists and people don't have options. But we are not that hierarchy that you actually see. And not only that, that you understand that this false individualism in the United States is just that, a false individualism that really captures you into some sort of indentured servitude. Why don't you kind of expand on that?
Well, so I think what you're saying is that there are a lot of societies today that have this domination system. And I'd like to add also, there were a lot of more partnerism systems way back 5,000, 10,000 years ago. So as far as your question, could you pinpoint your question?
Well, let me tell you what I mean exactly, right? We have this belief that we have this freedom of choice, freedom to do everything that we want to do. When in reality, if you take a look, corporate power, whatever, you have to be invited into the corporate structure. Women for a long time haven't been invited. Others haven't been invited. And I'm going to get back to our war stance in a minute, but I think this is a part of the whole picture as well. Where others have been excluded in a framework that claims each individual has equal access to success. When you have a country like Norway or Sweden, as you mentioned before, where the state has already said all of us are entitled to these real freedoms that make sure we have good existences. I mean, one has a false level of individualism, and one's social structure allows for real individualism.
That is such an interesting point. Yes, I would just say from my experience, I think we all get inculcated with this information and we believe it's kind of, you would just say propaganda. So here I thought I was okay and I was women were doing great, but then you find out, my goodness, we're not really in government. And you just, when you start to really focus on that, you really see it everywhere where, my goodness, I really don't have rights. And then to really find out, okay, I do have more rights because I am white, and just that feeling and bringing that into your heart, how much that is there. And when you don't notice it, I think it's just the question of kind of what you're taught as a child. And that's Rion Eisler speaks about that. So it is just a belief system, and once you're brought out of it, then it's really opens your eyes. So yes, but in the Nordic countries, there sometimes you have to force people to change. For example, they gave parental leave for men and women, and the men weren't taking it, and then they said if the men don't take it, then nobody gets it. So then the men started taking it because they're taught that to be caring and nurturing is bad. So I think we all just get sucked in by this.
And I want to tie that now into Ken. I know you want to say something, but I want to kind of tie you into a part of this discussion that I think is important. I think we are talking about wars, etc. That which, yes, but I think as people mature and get smarter and realize that they've been had, isn't that one of the reasons? And if you even take a look at Ukraine, people realizing that the things that they want and the dominant structure that Melanie has been talking about wants to remain dominant, and they cannot see this new thing, and they're going to execute. I mean, here in America, we have had a class that wanted to remain dominant, and that's why it's a warring class. Expand on that, if you will, and then tell me what it is that you want to add to that.
Melanie, are you talking to me now?
That's new, Ken.
Oh, okay.
Author.
Oh, okay. Yes. Okay. Well, first of all, yes, I think that the key to developing this, what Melanie was talking about in our podcast, the People Powered Planet podcast, is that all around the world, people basically want the same kind of things. They want peace, they want freedom, and they're manipulated. We're locked in these boxes called nation states, and the corporations are acting globally. Originally, the corporations were under the people. And in Jefferson's day, they had a 20-year charter to serve the people. But then they said, oh, if you try to regulate us, try to tax us, we'll go abroad. We control our pollution, we'll go abroad. So they gained all the power, they gained all the money, and they're all running the world. And they keep us divided in these boxes. But there's a superpower waiting to emerge that can stop all these wars and everything. And that superpower is the will of the people of the planet. You know, every single constitution starts with, almost every constitution starts with, it's based on the will of the people. The people, we the people of the United States, we the people of these other countries. And basically, when we, the people, break out of that nation state box, when we stop thinking we have to solve the problem by convincing our leaders, begging and pleading our leaders, and realize that these guys are working for us, we created them. And the Garry came to an amazing realization. You know, it wasn't called the application for independence. They didn't say to Britain, oh, please, Bell, come on, give us independence. We'll lobby, we'll write more letters, we'll plead and beg. They declared independence. They did it. We, the people of the United States, have to declare a government of, by, and for the people of the earth. And Garry took the amazing step of actually doing that. And David down there in Washington is part of that government that issues world passports, world IDs, and so on. It's the very beginning stages, but it's a shift in our idea, in our concept. When we stop thinking of ourselves as the governed and think of ourselves as the governors of this small planet, when we realize that we're the sovereigns who create it, and we start creating, using these incredible tools of the internet to start creating ways that we, the people, can actually begin to enforce world law. We can say, okay, you know, your company's going to violate world law and support this thing. Then we go through the supermarket, we scan products. Oh, this is a world law violator. We won't buy that. Apply for jobs. Oh, we won't apply. They're a world law violator. Load the ships. No, we won't load the ships. You know, ship the stuff. I mean, we the people have the power. They all get their power from us. If we withhold it and take it up to the world level and create what Garry called the people-powered planet, we are the superpower and the only superpower that can save us. You know, in our film, I asked Leonardo DiCaprio. I talked with him and I said, you know, in the movies, you know, at the last minute when things look impossible, a hero comes along and saves the day. Who's the hero who can save us? And he says, well, the hero is all of us. And that's what we have to do. We have to be the hero who steps to the plate, stops thinking that it all comes from begging and pleading existing leaders, and we become the leaders of our world.
That's a very good point. Now, David, I heard Arthur kind of mentioned you with regards to world passports and all that sort of thing. First of all, I like that kind of idea. I'm going to want to digress a bit afterwards, because I think, and Melanie alluded to that when she said we have to remove the indoctrination from the people. And that is the hardest part. My show, Politics Done Right, is dedicated to doing just that, empowering people and trying to tell people, no, the government is really you. I mean, you'd not imagine how many people say government is doing this and government is doing that. And I turn it around and I say, you mean that's what you're doing to people? You mean that's what you're, no, I mean the government that, and I said, who's controlling the government? Those corporations, and who gave those corporations the power to control the government? Guys, you have to assert your worth. You have to assert your power. I love this discussion. I love what Melanie is doing with the People Podcast. I love what Arthur is doing with the movies that he's putting out. But man, we got to work better at actually pushing the message and making sure it gets there. David, tell us about some passports and tell me some more.
Well, sure. I mean, just to follow up both on what Melanie and Arthur were saying, if our rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness are not being met, if they're not fulfilled, we, the people, have the right to create new government. That's what the Declaration of Independence said. We really need a declaration of interdependence, one where we, the people of the planet, come together. And that was
wow. I like that, the Declaration of Interdependence. Hey, did you give Arthur that line to put in one of his movies, man?
maybe on the hopefully there's going to be more films, more shows that relate to this story of World Citizen #1, and maybe something like that will appear in one of those shows. But yeah, no, the point of me saying that, not just to have a soundbite, but to say, really, we have one home. It is planet Earth. It is our only home. We can't yet easily get out into space. So if we don't protect it here, like Garry said to me, David, if you were given a choice to die to save humanity, would you? And I'm like, So it was sort of a trick question, because the point is, if I don't die, to save humanity, humanity's going to die. But if humanity dies, I'm going to die with it anyway. So, but I like to turn that around and make it positive and say, why, quote unquote, fight and die for a country when you can love and live for humanity and the earth? And that was really what Garry Davis was all about. That's really what the work at World Service Authority is about. In fact, this passport behind me, or here it is actually in my hand, this World Passport, in a sense, is a tool of love, a tool of peace, a tool of human rights that brings people together. And if I can take it just a quick moment, I would love to read just this short email from a fellow, which to me just says so much about the situation we're in. And so I'm going to change the names to protect this person's situation. But he says, "Hi, my name is Ivan. I'm in the center of Kyiv, in the very center of the war in Ukraine. I came here before the war and found myself in captivity of my own house, since going out in the street is deadly. I am from Russia. I have Russian citizenship, and at this time I am risking getting shot in the street if I show my passport. I am against the war in Ukraine. I supported the Ukrainian army because now they will not accept me in Russia either. All my life, I considered myself a man of the world, and I fully share the ideology of your organization. I always wanted to get such a passport, but there was no reason. It seems that day has come. In connection with recent events, I would like to give up my Russian citizenship and, as a matter of principle, use your passport until I receive asylum in another country. Please tell me, can you help me?" So it's that kind of letters that we're getting, and requests from both people in Russia, as well as this person was a Russian person in Ukraine, as well as Ukrainians. But that's not it. I mean, we get letters from the Rohingya refugees who fled Myanmar, Yemeni refugees who fled. I mean, why are we just talking about Ukraine now when there's all these other wars that are still going on? You know, Central African Republic, in Ethiopia, in Afghanistan still. Violence and war is going on every day, and it's the system that we need to change. We need to rule the law. Rule the world by the force of law, not by the law of force.
I love that. Before I go to author, that world passport, does it have any legalities behind it?
Yes, of course. The legality can be found both under international treaty law, customary international law, and actual usage. So the world passport gets its basic underpinnings from Article 13 and Article 6 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Here's what it looks like, and anyone can request a copy of it from us. Article 6 says everyone has the right to recognition everywhere as a person before the law. So everyone, everywhere, that's all humanity, right? And Article 13 says everyone has the right to freedom of movement and residence within the borders of each state, and everyone has the right to leave any country. So when you put those rights together, it means we humans have the right to travel freely.
So my question, I repeat my question, can I take that world passport and go to any country in the world?
Well, certainly that would be the ideal goal. If we're not there yet, so I would have to tell you there's been about 96% of all countries have actually stamped world passport holders passports with visa, entry, and exit stamps, but not all the time. And that's why World Service Authority has a legal advocacy team, so that if someone is detained at a border, or if they're refused entry or refused a visa, we jump into action, writing legal letters or legal briefs to support those people. I have to say, it's not always recognized. Garry Davis would say, look, it is a tool, like any tool. Like if you go to the hardware store and ask the hardware store owner, does that hammer on the shelf work? The hardware store owner is going to look at you and kind of funny and say, well, if you know how to take a nail and hammer two pieces of wood together, just like any tool, well, you have to know how to use it. You have to know what your rights are, because if you don't know your rights, you can't claim them. And it's not always easy, but we give everyone a copy of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in their language when they apply. So what I like to say is people become a human rights educator, a human rights activist when they're using this document. So certainly it may not be for everybody. So it's a question of education and training of both the people who are using this, but also the people to whom they present it, meaning the border officials and immigration officials and ministries of countries, to let them know that they actually have obligations, not only under the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, but under the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, which almost all countries in the world, even the United States, has ratified, meaning there are certain rights like our right to freedom of travel and our right to identification that must be recognized, whether you claim national sovereign, national security or other issues. Everyone still has those rights. They just have not been fully realized in the world we're living in today.
Okay, I'm going to go to Ken and Ken. I'm going to end with Ken also, but I want him to. He's been saying I want to say something. So I want to get to Ken. But sure. I want to warn both of you, both David and Melanie. Ken has done this with me. I mean, Arthur has done this with me before. Be thinking of the thing that you would have liked me to ask you that I hadn't asked you, because it's the last question to each. So anyway, Ken, let me hear what you're trying to say, and then I'll come to you last for that last question, which means you get a little bit more time than anybody else to come up with something. Go ahead.
It's Arthur Kanigis, by the way, I was just going to say, in light of David's letter, that I spoke to the President Landsbergis, who was the first head of state of Lithuania, which was the first country to break away from the Soviet Union. And they did it with a singing revolution where only less than 17 people or so got killed rather than all these other people. And they succeeded in defeating the incredible Soviet army just because they kept greeting them everywhere they went with their tanks and everything, with people singing, and no one would fight them and they couldn't do anything. And they finally had to just leave. But anyway, once he broke away, he said the only passport he had was this Russian passport, and he wanted to travel. So Garry Davis gave him a world passport 2 weeks after he became head of state. And he said, I interviewed him. He said, so I wanted to travel. I wouldn't use the old Soviet passport. So he said, I go to the border. I give them the world passport and they stamp it. Ho, ho, ho. He laughed. He thought that was so great. And he actually traveled with the world passport. And there are actually two of the heads of state of breakaway nations who use the world passport as their only passport. So it is very relevant to the struggle that's happening right now in the world with Russia. And again, it doesn't matter who's right and who's wrong in any of these wars. There's always a right side and always wrong. And every country, it's always the other guy who's the right side and the wrong side, and they're the right side. We have to come to a system of world law. We have to change the system, not change the players. It's not bad apples. It's a bad system.
We're running on time now, author. And by the way, I do know your author. Please don't. I kept doing Ken because the K is right there. But I do know who I'm talking to. Thank you very much.
I'm sorry.
All right, let's see. Melanie, give me your closer.
Yes.
What would you have liked me to ask you?
Oh, well, as Arthur said, the system is what we need to change. And we need to have world law. We need to have murder illegal wherever in the world, all over the planet. It's illegal. And I'd like to invite people. We have a fantastic opportunity. One of the cornerstones of moving from a domination system is stories. And that's what we have, an amazing story about Garry Davis, The World is My Country. It's going to be playing on Link TV, broadcast to 31 million people. And you can be a sponsor. So we have 1 minute only for people that they can be a sponsor before the movie. So contact us. I'll go ahead and give you our email. It's futurewavefilms@gmail.com. Join us. It's quick. It's this year, so we're going to get our sponsors quickly, and we're going to get it out to the world. So thank you for having us.
Go for it, David.
Yeah, sure. Well, we've mostly talked about law today and the lack of law at the world level. But I want to know for your viewing public, what does it mean to be a world citizen? And people might fear that term because they might think that means giving up some lower or other allegiance, but it's not. When you, for example, register as a world citizen through World Service Authority, you're not giving up anything. You're just adding that higher awareness of our link to humanity and the earth. As world citizens, we have rights and duties to each other and to the planet. And whether it's war, whether it's climate change, whether it's injustice or nuclear weapons, or you name any, or the pandemic, any other global issue, unless we start dealing with those global issues as world citizens, as human beings first, then nothing else will matter. We have to come to those solutions that are global, that link us all as world citizens together.
Close her out, Arthur.
Well, I would say the question is, how can I get to see this movie? And yes, you can go to theworldismycountry.com. Theworldismycountry.com. You can click on where to watch, and you can there are several ways that you can watch it from there. And you can also email Melanie, as she mentioned, if you want to be one of the sponsors or supporters. If you're going to be a sponsor or supporter, we'll give you a free link to watch it, so you can come aboard and join us. There's both the TV version that's 1 hour, a little less than an hour, and then there's the full theatrical version that's even better and has some much more about David and the world passport and so on in it. So we encourage you to watch that version. Yes, join us, watch the film, and discover your power as how you can be the key in helping to create the people power planet. The young people today can be the Dolly and James Madisons of inventing a whole new way of running our world. It didn't stop in 1776. We, the people, have to invent government. Jefferson said that, and he said, and we've got to do it, folks.
Arthur Kanigas, David Gallup, and Melanie Bennett, thank you so kindly for having been on Politics Done Right. I will definitely do this again.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Wow. Thank you.
We spend a lot of time deconstructing the news, trying to parse it into a form that everybody can understand. We try to find those little nitpicks where it flies above the fray, etc. If you really like these videos that we do, I want to ask a big favor. Please go ahead. Number one, subscribe to our channel, and number two, please join if you can. Thank you so kindly for watching. Keep watching. Please remember to share. We must populate the entire internet with our progressive message, a message that we know is what most Americans say that they want. So help us, please join.